They are precious symbols of our faith. They are a precious part of God's creation. And we have been journeying on our way from Eden to New Jerusalem. We have encountered in Eden the two trees, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, reminding us of the precious gift of free will that God has given us. We remembered that God is the one who sustains and rescues us in the midst of the floods in life with the olive tree. We remember that God's promises are not thwarted when we remember Ezekiel's vision of the cedar tree. The story of Abraham offered us the story of sacrificial hospitality under the oak tree. With the story of Deborah and Barak, we were reminded of trust, that we are to trust God to bring the victory when He sends us forth. With the palm tree, under the broom tree, Elijah received comfort and provision from God. And then last week, with the fig tree, we heard God's call for us to turn our lives around from barrenness to be those who produce the fruit of the Spirit. I ask you, how many of you are not ashamed to be called a tree hugger? Jesus was journeying to Jerusalem, and He passed through Jericho. And in Jericho, Jesus met a tree hugger. Zacchaeus, though, was not a tree hugger for the reason that we've been talking about being a tree hugger. Zacchaeus was a tree hugger because he had climbed up into a sycamore tree. Because he was, how shall we put it, vertically challenged. And he wanted to see Jesus. So Zacchaeus climbed into that tree and he hung on, hugging it tightly as he wanted to see Jesus. So what is it? Bless you. What is it about Zacchaeus and the sycamore tree that make this story so important and such a central part of our faith? Is there any more to this than the fact that Zacchaeus was a wee little man and a wee little man was he? Thank you once again, Linda, for realizing that I cannot lead the children in singing, or anyone else for that matter. So what is it about good old Zach that makes this story so important? Well, the first thing we have to acknowledge is that Zacchaeus was not good old Zach. Zacchaeus was a scoundrel. No one liked Zacchaeus. First of all, he was the chief tax collector. This is March. April's approaching. How many of you are thrilled when it comes to tax collectors? No hands going up there. But it was more, this time of year, we're not very fond of the IRS either. But it wasn't like that with Zacchaeus. He was not just Jericho's IRS agent. You see, he didn't work for the government of the Jewish folks. He was a Jew who worked for Rome. He was working for the enemy. He was a servant and being employed by the occupying forces that were in Jericho. And all of the people, all of the land of God's people. So Zacchaeus, not only was he a tax collector, but as a tax collector, he was seen as a traitor to his own people because he was working for the enemy. But it gets worse than that. We read that Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector and was rich. How many of you know how tax collectors in Jesus' time made their living? I see a hand or two, a few hands out there. He wasn't paid by Rome to go out and collect the taxes. He collected the taxes, and in order to be able to sustain his life, he added a little bit extra to the taxes he was collecting. And since Zacchaeus was a rich man, we figure he didn't add just a little bit to those taxes to be able to sustain himself. He had added a whole lot to the amount that he was collecting. So not only was he a traitor, but he was taking advantage of his own people in order to live a very comfortable life there in Jericho. How many of you want to be friends with Zacchaeus if you were living there? Zacchaeus, wee little man, built himself up by bringing others down. Nobody liked Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, though, he knew that. He knew that no one liked him. Zacchaeus was the kind of man that kept his ear to the ground because he wanted to know what was going on. He wanted to be aware so he heard the rumblings, he heard the complaints, he heard the curses that were associated with his name whenever it came up. Because he listened. And he listened to how discouraged and desperate the people always were. But then he began hearing something else. He began hearing not just whisperings cursing his name, but he began to hear ripples of hope, ripples of promise, ripples of encouragement. And he began hearing praises of a name far more often than curses of his own name. And all this hope, all this encouragement seemed to be associated around one name, Jesus. People kept talking about Jesus. And so he listened as those ripples and whisperings of hope turned into proclamations of encouragement. And he heard that this Jesus was coming to Jericho, and the people were getting excited that this Jesus was coming to Jericho. And he heard that the people were going to start lining the street, and he went out there, and that's what they were actually doing. They were lining the street because it was the day that Jesus was supposed to come in to town. And he tried, because he couldn't see over the top of all those people, he tried to work his way to the front of the people. But guess what? Nobody liked him. So nobody was going to have mercy on this little short guy that had all their money. And no one would let him get to the front to see who this man was that they were talking about. And then he saw it. He saw there along the street a sycamore tree. And it had branches that hung out over the street. So he went over to the tree and he struggled and he strained and he finally pulled himself up into that tree and he found a sturdy branch that hung out over the crowds, and he climbed out on that branch. And I'm just going to say he didn't like heights, and so he was hanging on and hugging that branch tightly as he watched to see who this was that everybody kept talking about. And then everything changed. For he saw him coming in to town. He saw him walking up that street. And there was something about him. There was something different about him. It was as if light radiated from him. And then it happened. That man Jesus, he stopped right as he was walking down the street. And he looked up into the sycamore tree. And he made eye contact with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus felt like he could see into the depths of his soul. And he changed his path until he came and he stood right under that sycamore tree. He said, Zacchaeus, what are you doing up there? Get down. I'm going to your house today to eat with you. And Zacchaeus hurried down the tree. And Jesus and Zacchaeus went to Zacchaeus' house. And yes, all those people that didn't like Zacchaeus there were just grumbling and fussing and everything. Jesus didn't pay him any mind. And for Zacchaeus couldn't see anything else but Jesus. And the longer he spent time with Jesus, the more he felt himself changing. The more he knew that he could no longer be the same person that he used to be. That he had to change, that he had to be someone different than who he was. He tells Jesus, I'm going to give away half of what I have. Half of what I have. He said, and Jesus, if I've taken advantage of anyone, if I have defrauded anyone, if I have built myself up by being unfair to others, I'm going to give every penny of it back times 4. He was going to make reparations, but not just in kind. He was going to multiply what he had done. Jesus changes folks that much. So the part of the importance of this story, this scene in the life of Jesus, part of the importance of the sycamore tree and the Zacchaeus is that it doesn't matter for any of us here where we are. It doesn't matter how filled with sin our lives are. Jesus wants us. He loves us and accepts us right where we are in the midst of our sin. And he wants to spend time with us. And he wants to let his presence change our lives. But that's only a small part of the story. Because this story is just as important to those who have already been spending time with Jesus and have already felt their lives transformed by Jesus or being transformed by Jesus. because we are called to look at Jesus' response to the sinner. We are called as those who have given our lives to follow Jesus, to pay attention to how Jesus interacts with those whose lives are ingrained in sin. Jesus, when he encounters sinners, he does not look down his nose at the sinner. He does not condemn the sinner. He does not judge the sinner. He does not shun the sinner. He does not look at the sinner and say, "Gross, I don't want to be in their presence." Jesus befriends the sinner. Jesus touches the sinner. Jesus loves. Eats with the sinner. Spends time with the sinner. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. Because all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory. And if our lives are among those that God is already transforming, then our response to the sinner should be Jesus' response to the sinner. Not one of judgment, not one of condemnation, not one of attack, but of love. That they, like we have experienced, may know the transforming, powerful grace of God. My brothers and sisters, we are going to come and we are going to share this holy meal that Jesus began, as Jesus ate with sinners. You see, Jesus shared this meal on that night that he would be arrested. He shared this meal with a bunch of sinners. He shared it with 10 men who would desert him, and one man who would betray him. He knew before he gathered them for that meal that they would desert him and that they would betray him. And yet he sat down and shared this meal with sinners. My friends, as we gather to receive this meal today, as Jesus himself offers this meal to us today and calls us to gather and share it, may the grace of God transform our lives, that we may share that transforming grace